Hi there and welcome to a new video where the topic is going to be importing metadata, thumbnails and previews into existing archive indexes which have already got assets inside of them. So when archiving with P5 Archive, it's possible to generate thumbnails and proxies of media files, and also to import metadata from within those files at the time of archiving. But it may be that you didn't do that when you originally archived the files, or it may be that you've imported some foreign LTFS tapes into your P5, and therefore we've just pulled in the information about the files and folder structure, but we haven't included any proxies and metadata for those files because it simply wasn't available to P5. So using version 7.16, which is the current version as of right now, and the version that you can see on the screen there, this is the first version that supports this new feature. It's possible to use a couple of scripts which we've written to import metadata, and the topic of this video is how you do that, both on Linux, and also it works the same on Mac OS and on Windows. So let's begin. So what we have here is a P5 installation, and all I've done so far is that I've archived some media files. So if we have a look in our archive index and we drill into data, in this folder here we've got a load of JPEG files which have no metadata nor previews, thumbnails, and then in the video folder there are 3 video files that again don't have any proxies or any description data against them. So this is our starting point. Now, in order to provide the data that P5 needs, in other words the metadata and the location of the proxies and thumbnails, we need to provide it with a CSV, a comma separated file with that data inside. Now, a good starting point for this will be what we call an inventory, which is a list of all the files that exist in the archive index. And there's a command you can run in a Linux shell as follows to output this inventory, like so. So my current directory is my rqware P5 installation directory, which will normally be USR local AW on a default installation. And then from within that folder, you're going to call the NSD chat utility in the bin folder and provide it with these arguments. This will be included in the blog article too, so there's no need to write this down. And the final argument of this command is a file which will be created, a text file, that will contain 1 line for each file in the index. So if we run that now, and then if I look at that file, inventory.txt, you'll see that there's a line for every file, also a line for each folder. So starting at the root level at the top, we've got the data folder, then we've got the metadata ingest test, and then we've got the JPEGs within that. And then if we scroll down to the bottom of this file, you'll see finally the video folder and the 3 MP4 files that we find in that video folder. So what I suggest that you do is copy paste this into a spreadsheet so that you can start to assemble the metadata and the path to the previews. So if we go back to our browser here, I've copied and pasted this. I've excluded the lines that just have the empty folders inside. And so this would be a good starting point. This is just a Google Sheets spreadsheet in the browser. And then ultimately what you need to end up with, that I have in this other tab here, is the metadata that you want to import, all referenced against the file from the archive index. So column A contains the location of this file in the archive index. Column B is a reference to a JPEG file that exists on the file system on this Linux machine that is a thumbnail for this original file. So this file over here might be the high res, and then this is a thumbnail file from that original file. The thumbnails don't have to have the same file name as the originals, but in this case they do. And column C contains some description text data about the JPEG, and column D contains a file size for each of these files. Most of those are the same, but the video files at the bottom you'll see are somewhat larger. So with all of this data in a spreadsheet, you'll be able to use some kind of an export function to export a CSV file from the spreadsheet data. And obviously this metadata that you're needing to import is likely to exist for you in a MAM or DAM system. It's going to exist somewhere, and you'll just need to be able to convert that into a spreadsheet so that you can get this data out as a CSV file. Now, I have this CSV file already in my RQware installation directory. So I've got this Clips Linux file here. So next what we need is the script. So the script is called metadata import.sh. This is the script that will run on Mac OS or Linux installations. If we take a look at the script, I'll just talk you through how this works. It takes a number of arguments. So it expects to take a username, a password, and an IP address of your P5 server, and then the name of the CSV file that you're going to use to import the metadata. And you can have some different number of columns in your CSV file depending on how much metadata you want to import, and those are covered here. So our CSV file contains the file path, the C path, which is the file to the clip or the proxy or thumbnail, and then it contains a description, and the final column in the CSV file is the file size. And what the script does is it loops round each line of the input CSV file, and what it'll do is it'll echo to the standard output the values that it's handling for each file, and then down here it will run the NSD chat utility 3 times, once for each piece of metadata that's being inserted, and then it will insert the description, it'll insert the file size, and it will insert the clip path here. So the clip path is always included in the archive index. In fact, the description field is also included in an archive index by default, but we'll need to add the file size as a separate field into our archive index so that those file size values have somewhere to go. And we can do that in the P5 user interface right now before we actually run the script to import the metadata. So if we go back here to our P5, I'm going to go into the archive tab. I'm going to go to my default archive index here, and I'm going to right click and get myself into the field editor where I can add file size to the description field, which is already in there. So to do this, we add the new field name down here, which will be file size, and then the application name will be file size, written capitalized with a space. It's going to be a text field. It can be a single row in the UI, and we'll have it in order number 2 so that it follows the description field. I'll click the add button, and when adding user fields, P5 always prepends user underscore before the name you've given it. So now it matches the name user underscore file size that we have in the script. So those two things need to match. So we now have a home for the file size, and in fact if we go back into the archive index and find an asset, you'll see that we have both a description and a file size field somewhere for those pieces of information to live, plus up here this is where our preview will appear. So now in order to actually get the metadata imported, what we do is we run the metadata import script as follows. So we're calling the metadata import script, we're providing the username, password and the IP of the host where P5 is running. It's going to you'll be doing this on the machine where P5 is running directly, so this will always be the loopback address. And then the final thing you specify on the command line is the CSV file that you're going to use to provide the metadata to be imported. So let's run that now, and you'll see the output. So immediately for each file you see that P5 outputs, well, the script outputs the handle, which is the unique identifier within P5 for each of the files found in the first column of the CSV file, followed by the description, the path to the clip or preview, and finally the file size. So we'll let this complete. So that's finished. It should be noted that each of the clips that are being imported will actually be moved from the original folder, in this case the folder name that I'm highlighting here. They'll be moved out of here into the clips folder within the archive index folder within the P5 installation. So rather than copying each of those files, they're moved into the correct place that P5 needs them to be, and they're also renamed so that they can be referenced from within the index correctly. So next we'll go back to our P5 interface, and we need to wait a few minutes at this point because P5 periodically processes this information on the back end. So if you don't see, well, you won't see the previews, as you can see here, appear straight away. You'll see the metadata, so you can see there for these JPEG files the metadata is showing up correctly, including for the video files down here, but we don't see the previews yet, so we just need to wait a couple of minutes. So let's do that. So now we can see the previews and the metadata for each one of these files, and the same deal for the three video files where we have proxy playable, like so. These are just 30-second proxy files, and then likewise for these other ones. So turn off the volume. Yeah, so that's how you do it on Mac/Linux. Let's have a look to see how this same thing is achieved with a batch file on Windows. Okay, so here we are with a Windows installation of P5 version 7.16. With this one I've done as I did in the previous installation, where I've archived a bunch of JPEG files, but there's no metadata. I've added the file size field, no metadata, no preview. And over here on the desktop we've got a metadata import batch file and a pre-prepared metadata Windows CSV file. If you want to build a list of everything that's in the index on a Windows system so that you can start to build your CSV file from a list of every item in the index, then you can do that on the command line. Start off in the program files archiware installation directory and then run this command, which calls the NSD chat utility from the binaries directory, provides it with login authentication information to connect to a server, in this case again the remote server on the CLI port 9001, and then we're requesting archive index, default archive, and then the inventory command which outputs everything in the index, and finally you specify the file name that you want the inventory to be written to. So if we hit return on that one, we'll get a file on the desktop that contains a list of all of those JPEGs, just like you saw on the Linux system. And then you could remove the entries that are pure directories and then begin to add the metadata and the location of the clip preview files. And if we look at my CSV file that's been prepared, you'll see that it's the same as the Linux file, other than we're using forward slashes and drive letters. So this is the file path in the archive index that's already been archived. This is the location of the JPEG thumbnail for that file. It doesn't have to have the same file name, but they do in my example. And then the rest of the CSV lines contain the description in quotes and the file size on the end. So the batch file that we're going to run looks like this. So it's just a batch equivalent of what we'd already seen in the shell script. You can add additional items of metadata here. It's just a case of setting additional variables from the parameters that have been provided. As we iterate through, file size is the fourth one. So in the CSV file, so that picks up letter D, it goes A, B, C, D, so you can add an E and then push that into a variable, and then use this command here to specify that we output that into the field that's called description or user file size in our archive index. So let's run this script. So to run the script, we're specifying full path to the batch file, our authentication username and password, and the host that's running P5, followed by the CSV file on the end. So let's hit enter on that one, and we'll see output from the batch file telling us which files are being updated. Let's let that complete. Okay, so that's finished. So if we flick back to our archive index, we should already be able to see the results. So there we go. We've got some road bikers, a description and a file size, and same applies for all of the other entries in the index. So now we have searchable metadata in our archive index. So for example, here we have runner in the fog, but I could go and search my description field for starting with run, and then it finds some files, and then we could flick to gallery view and up the size a little bit to get a nice view, having located those files and being able to see the thumbnails that we've just imported. So thanks for watching this video. Hope that's all clear. Like I said at the outset, look in the description under the video here on YouTube for a link to the blog article, which will give you links to download the script and also explain in text and images how to go through this process. Thanks for watching.